In 1987, London's affluent Knightsbridge area was the scene of an armed raid so spectacular it entered the criminal record books as one of the biggest heists of the century.
No other robbery in this country has come close to it.
It was a colossal job.
A staggering £40 million worth of valuables were stolen when a ruthless Italian robber smashed his way into hundreds of safety deposit boxes,
making it Britain's biggest robbery.
The Italian Playboy, the Italian stallion, he was playing around with the girls. He liked the flash cars.
Make sure everything runs smoothly.
The plan was cunning and its execution fearless. So how did he do it? This is the incredible story of the Knightsbridge safety deposit box raid. Security Deposits PLC, located in one of London's wealthiest areas, was a safe haven for the very rich.
Knightsbridge is a hugely expensive area. A lot of foreigners live in the service flats around that area. Harrods dominates the street because it's one of the most expensive department stores in the world. Lots of foreign tourists there. Always a very busy area, expensive cafes, nice restaurants, very fashionable streets. There could be an awful lot of money, jewellery, stocks and shares, all sorts of things deposited there. So if you lived in the area and you had a safe deposit box, that's the sort of place you would go to keep your valuables.
The best in Britain. That's how the owners described the Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Centre when the doors were opened for the first time just 4 years.
Located in a district where the fabulously wealthy lived, worked and played, Security Deposits had customers on its doorstep and from around the world. They came to store their treasures in one of the 4,000 boxes housed in a solid vault at its centre.
You go into the front entrance and there you have a reception, the manager and his staff, and you want a box, you give details. People were keeping monies for whatever reason, documents for whatever reasons, jewellery for whatever reasons, even drugs and firearms for whatever reasons in deposit boxes. And the rental per annum is not a lot of money.
Sunday, the 12th of July, 1987. Parvez Latif, the owner and manager of Security Deposits, was waiting for 2 potential clients to arrive.
They had appointment as prospective customers who were dressed as respectable businessmen, had an appointment with Parvez Latif, the manager. He let them in. They then went downstairs into the vault area.
As Latif was showing the men the facilities, the mood suddenly changed when one of them pulled a gun.
When someone is forced to do something by another person and through fear they will cooperate. He's now under control.
With a gun to his back, Latif was forced into the security control room.
The manager, Latif, took them down there. Viccei was then able to get into the control room. He grabbed the guard there. The guard couldn't press an alarm, which was an internal alarm anyway. He locked them away in the ante-room, handcuffed them. He now had control down there.
Their terrifying ordeal was about to get much worse.
He went back upstairs, and then he waited for the other guard and just held him at gunpoint. The guards were petrified. You've been manhandled and you've had firearms in your face.
The gang of armed robbers, led by a man called Valerio Viccei, had overcome the owner and 2 security guards in a matter of minutes. They were locked in a separate room. The fortress, holding millions of pounds worth of valuables, was now at the mercy of the robbers.
Viccei was in control. He was quite very determined. He knew what he wanted, what he was going to do. He knew he was limited on the time.
And time was now a crucial factor. Regular customers could enter the premises at any moment and disrupt the gang's plan. But Viccei was a step ahead. An accomplice was posted in front of the building, waiting for his cue.
Locked the front door, put a notice on that they regret apologies because there was either building work or whatever was being done. They now controlled the building.
The deposit box centre was now secured. Thousands of boxes holding cash and valuables lay inside. With everyone in position, the gang sealed the centre and put their plan into action. The security deposit boxes were housed in a solid steel vault in the building's basement. There were 4,000 boxes in the room, but only 800 were in use, holding anything from deeds and bonds to cash and jewellery.
He knew he was limited on the time. He had an hour and a half to break open the boxes. He's running to time.
The gang grabbed their final accomplice from outside and began their raid. They had to finish before the centre supervisor came to check on the premises.
Was banging at the boxes, the other was right behind him. And then the other two were sweeping up. Rings and jewellery boxes. Yeah, they broke down everything they could. That's what the other two were there for, and sorting out. It was like a shuffling behind, and they would break up, bang, bang. Anything bulky, yeah, they'd get rid of.
Although the containers were made of thick steel, box after box was smashed open. Those that were in use had different colours on the locks, so the gang knew which to target. They wasted no time nabbing the contents.
They were then scooping up and putting the gear, sorting out the big boxes, so you're minimalising the packaging and just pouring in whatever you've got, jewellery, gold, Kruger hands, notes and everything, just pouring it into the big boss bags, take them out.
There could be an awful lot of money, jewellery, stocks and shares, all sorts of things deposited there.
As the villains ransacked the vault, the staff were forced to sit and listen to the chaos. The thieves worked tirelessly for over an hour, bagging up everything they could get their hands on. But time was running out. The centre supervisor was due any minute.
He was ready to go. That's the professionalism of it. You see the films, don't you? You see the stories on the TV where they go, no, we've got to have one more, and he's trying to grab the last pound note, the last bit of jewellery, and then they drive off and he's left stranded. You know, that's just maybe film, the way films work. But no, this guy was professional. You know, you look, bang, you do as you're told, off we go, and that's it.
They must have realised that they couldn't really spend all night there. Other staff were going to turn up. People were going to want to put stuff in the safe deposits on Sunday night or on Monday morning.
The robbers lugged their bags of loot out of the vault. Then they made sure the last member of staff wouldn't cause them any grief.
He was ready for 5 o'clock for the guard to come in, who was going to lock the vault, and the time lock was going to be placed on. When the guard knocked on the back door to be allowed in, he then apprehended him at gunpoint as well and left.
The vault was a mess. The gang had been relentless in their raid, smashing their way through a box every 30 seconds. Now, as the staff sat helpless, the villains fled into the busy streets of London with no sign of the police.
Eventually, police were called. There was a horrendous scene of crime as such, because 121 boxes, deposit boxes, had been broken open. There was property throughout the vault, discarded property.
As the hunt got underway, Viccei put the next stage of his plan into action. The team split up and he went off alone. Meanwhile, the police began the painstaking task of investigating the crime.
In a very minute way, steadily, basically foot by foot. And it took 8 days to examine the vault. What we did realise after some time, but it wasn't the sort of faces that we thought could be responsible.
These weren't the familiar suspects from any of the big London armed robbery gangs.
No information was coming from other police officers. No other information was coming from police informants.
Scotland Yard had little to go on, and Viccei thought he was home and dry. For him, it had been a very good payday. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure on Scotland Yard mounted. Figures leaked to the media about the size of the haul were rising fast,
£40 million.
but they still had few leads. One of the challenges for officers was tracing all the victims affected.
Your victims of crime have to be seen, in this case, 100 and whatever losers, so I want identification of property.
A problem for detectives is that some customers are unlikely to tell them what's missing or how much it's worth.
I've lost all my jewellery except for what I'm wearing today.
Of the 121 box holders, I think that we traced about 109. That leaves 12 box holders that you must wonder why they've not come forward.
Some owners never went to the police, so nobody has any idea what was in those boxes.
As the investigation continued, the scale of the robbery became apparent. It was quickly becoming Britain's largest ever heist.
The rumours began to swirl about the amount of money or the amount of material that might have gone.
Yesterday evening, shocked customers gathered outside the centre. Some had lost everything.
The amount began to mount. Police began to talk about £5 million.
More than £10 million in valuables.
So it just began to creep up. Once people realised what could be held in safe deposit boxes, there began a lot of speculation.
The true value of the raid may never be known.
As media interest in the investigation grew, Scotland Yard finally got a much-needed breakthrough.
We found a fingerprint in blood. Well, that's when it breaks, doesn't it? Bang.
The Metropolitan Police were in the midst of tackling one of the biggest robberies in British history. An audacious gang had ransacked an exclusive safety deposit box centre in Knightsbridge, fleeing with millions of pounds worth of loot. Pressure was building on Scotland Yard to catch the culprits. After a fingertip search of the crime scene, the police got their first breakthrough.
Turning point in the case is quite simple in itself, is that it was the fingerprint.
Officers may have had a fingerprint, but matching it to a suspect was a different matter. Meanwhile, efforts were concentrated on determining what had happened, with the help of the centre's owner, Parvez Latif.
Tag it, flag it, yeah, make sure it's absolutely recorded properly. Yeah, okay.
He bought the safe deposit company about a year earlier.
Latif's lifestyle as such was that he was using coke, he was in love with his girlfriend Pamela Seamarks, he wanted to marry her.
The police began looking into Latif's personal life, while he assisted them with their inquiries.
We even did a video construction with him involved in it, show us exactly what happened.
As officers built a profile of Latif and pieced together the robbery, vital information on the fingerprint finally came through.
Fingerprint comparisons were not automated. It had to be done by visual observation, and it took them weeks to go through a huge card index and a huge collection of fingerprints. Then the penny dropped. And they realised who they were looking for.
The fingerprint was then sent to New Scotland Yard, where it was eventually identified as belonging to Valerio Viccei. We were very fortunate that his fingerprints were in the indexes there. They'd been sent over by the Italian authorities in 1986 because they wanted Viccei for major crimes in Italy. They believed he was in England. These people that you're dealing with are top class.
ID each?
We had no idea who it was.
Valerio Viccei was a rather unique criminal. Flash, brash, and with good looks to boot. He had Italian charm, charisma, and a Playboy lifestyle. He liked beautiful women, fast cars, and money in his pocket. Lots of money.
He had obviously quite a bit of money from the robberies because he lived a very good life and was quite a high roller, which means he must have made a lot of money.
It wasn't just them. I mean, the money helped because he wanted a Playboy lifestyle. But it wasn't his main motivation. His main motivation was he got such a kick out of it.
wall-to-wall women, cocaine and cars. And that sums him up. And there are lots of people who have been tremendous characters, very powerful, very clever, very ruthless. Viccei was something slightly different to all of that, something rather extravagant. Viccei was a jack-the-lad in a big way. I can't think of a criminal quite like him in any of the other cases that I've done.
Viccei was no stranger to luxury. He came from a privileged background in Italy.
His father was a libel lawyer and his mother ran a boutique. He went to university. I mean, he was well educated.
But his respectable upbringing had done nothing to curb his thirst for crime. Viccei may have been unknown to the British authorities, but his face was very familiar to Italian police. Detective Inspector Leach discovered that Valerio Viccei was an accomplished thief, wanted in his home country for over 50 robberies, all by the age of 32.
They knew him very well there. And he got away with blue murder. And even when he was arrested for different offences, the system in Italy is very, I wouldn't say bizarre, but we had a job understanding it, but there's so many bail proceedings. He was just arrogant, and he's in their face all the time.
He was the number one, he was the top of his profession, and that's the world they live in.
The police had a job on their hands. A ruthless Italian playboy was their number one suspect, and he was a slippery customer. D.I. Leach set to work finding out more about this elusive character.
High class, high quality. He's got the briefcase, Louis Vuitton, whatever it is, Rolex watch and so on. You know, he knows his way around, you know, that's his lifestyle.
Viccei was arrogant, he was extrovert, great womanizer.
As they built a profile of their suspect, officers realized they were dealing with a chancer who'd already had more than a few close scrapes with the law.
The Italian police tracked him down to London and asked Scotland Yard to arrest him. 2 officers stopped his car, not knowing very much about his background. And Viccei said, "Oh, I'd better just turn off my car telephone." Got out the other side and ran off down the street and disappeared again. He's very, very ready for the chase, ready to get away. Very alert, quick thinking.
Viccei was used to giving the police the slip.
Because we didn't find him at all, we found everybody else because he was in and out of the country. And that's where, again, your manpower comes into it because you now need surveillance teams, surveillance equipment, things to focus on addresses and so on. We then went to work on those associates, not knowing whether they were involved in the crime or not. And all their vehicles and whatever details we had about them, where they were working. And then you get the breaks.
Surveillance flagged up some interesting characters associated with Viccei. Eric Rubin, known to the police with previous minor convictions. Stephen Mann, a wild card, no criminal background, but closely linked to Viccei. Peter O'Donoghue, mixed in the same social circles as the Italian charmer. David Poole, not only linked to Viccei, but also seen frequenting certain places of interest to the police. And Israel Pincus, who officers were keeping an eye on, and who would inadvertently lead them to their next major breakthrough.
Pincus's car was identified as being at White's Hotel. He got a parking ticket, because we'd put that on the computer.
Nobody had a fixed address for Viccei, but they knew of his associates, and the police began to look at the associates, the people around him, and that led them slowly towards where he might be.
All the suspects, all the people that Italy had said, look, he knows Viccei's associate of O'Donoghue, Paul and Pincus. We started working on them, found out where they were living or their movements.
And these inquiries paid off. Just weeks into the investigation, the flying squad got their next lead.
The surveillance teams had looked at a Ferrari Testarossa. This was the vehicle that Viccei was using. It then figured, then we seen Pincus's car, then you see the Ferrari. Then it linked it up.
London, 1987. Scotland Yard had one of the biggest robberies in criminal history on its hands. An Italian career criminal had raided a vault of safety deposit boxes and fled with a wealth of valuables. As information poured in, the police realized the stolen loot was worth tens of millions of pounds. Yet almost a month after the robbery, their #1 suspect, Valerio Viccei, was still giving officers the slip. But how much longer could he elude them? The flying squad were now hot on his heels and had tracked him to a London hotel.
We actually found out that they'd been using whites.
Yes, it's Mr. Viccei.
The day I spoke to the manager there, he said, well, Viccei's been here today, he's gone, but he was meeting a Mr. Paul.
Officers were getting close to their #1 suspect. By now, the value of goods stolen stood at a staggering £40 million, and Viccei was the country's #1 fugitive. All Detective Inspector Leach could do was pray he'd surface again. Then Leach got the call he'd been waiting for.
I went to New Scotland Yard to put things together, and then I got a phone call again saying, oh, Viccei's just walked into White's Hotel.
Hello, could I speak to DR Leach, please?
I said, oh, he's just arrived, you know, so bang.
As soon as I can, thank you.
It was the turning point officers needed.
We knew Viccei was the man. That was the first time we'd actually had a sighting of him.
He'd been staying at a hotel in West London, I think it was White's, and they began to watch that, and there he was with his big Ferrari, which he was about to export.
But just as Viccei came within touching distance, he vanished again, speeding off through the capital in his sports car.
Viccei was just coming out of the hotel and just got into the Ferrari and then drove off down the Bayswater Road towards Marble Arch.
The police weren't about to let him slip away. They gave chase.
At the end of the day, yeah, he's a big fish. You've got to catch him. And that's when we gave the order to take him out. The Ferrari was in traffic going towards the Marble Arch. It's a very difficult thing trying to take someone out of a car. He was blocked in. The traffic was building up, Bayswater. But you don't want to chase with a Ferrari Testarossa anywhere, do you? The order was given, and at the appropriate time, they pulled him out.
Got him, Gov. Valerio Viccei, my name's Freddie from the flying squad.
Viccei was a showman. He had 2 Ferraris, and the reason he was caught was because he was waiting to send his second and favourite Ferrari to Colombia, which is where he was going to go to. If he hadn't been so ridiculously vain and greedy, they would not have caught him. They rammed his car, which must have been a very painful moment for a man who stayed in Britain long enough to want to export this thing. It was an £84,000 Ferrari, I seem to remember. So, but they didn't have much choice. I mean, there's a guy who they knew was normally armed.
A quick search of Viccei's precious vehicle revealed some clear signs that he had been living the life of Riley.
A lot of the stuff that was in his briefcase, in the car, he had a lot of that still with him. I mean, top-class jewellery.
The flying squad finally had their man, along with some incriminating evidence. Viccei's fingerprint placed him firmly at the scene of the crime, and his track record proved he was a professional thief with a string of robberies to his name. But was he prepared to talk to the police?
Valerio Viccei did not implicate anyone else in the robbery. It didn't mention any names. We found him with immense amount of property and so on, and it followed. He knew what was going to happen, so he took the blame on himself.
Viccei claimed to be a one-man band, but the police knew there was more to the story.
The ball started rolling because then we had to then start hitting all the others because we now realised, you know, a lot of work had been done.
Officers wasted no time arresting Viccei's associates. They'd put their necks on the line to pull off Viccei's dream job, but didn't appear to be big-time players themselves. So what was their motive?
They got 100,000 each in the split, and the possibility of getting more later.
Do you know Mr. Eric Rubin at all?
As the flying squad grilled the other culprits, they quickly discovered Viccei was one of a kind, an intelligent thief who'd effectively evaded justice for years. But how had he robbed the Knightsbridge Security Centre without raising any alarms?
It was clear that the robbers had to have known, for example, that the closed-circuit television wasn't functioning, that there would be very few staff around on a Sunday afternoon, that it was very easy to bring a car or a van up to the back to load stuff in, that there were no parking restrictions on Sunday afternoon then, I don't think, that CCTV didn't exist in the streets around then, which of course it didn't in the 1980s. So somebody had to have not only cased the place, I visited it and looked around, but also had a good idea of how the place worked.
Viccei was claiming no one else was involved, but this kind of detail had to come from somewhere.
The fact that he'd been there a number of times, and then because their records weren't that good there, the video cameras didn't work. It was so slack there. It was possible that he had recognised the faults in the security there by just visiting. But we did suspect Latif, but no, it just seemed too big.
As suspicion surrounding Latif grew, one of Viccei's associates, Stephen Mann, broke.
Stephen Mann was not a criminal in the true sense. Once he realised that, main man's arrested and so on, and he then just put his hands up.
So what is your relationship with Mr. Viccei?
And he decided that he would give evidence for us against the others, particularly Viccei.
Mann rolled over, telling the police what had happened after the robbery.
He went up to Brownlow Court, where the garage was at the rear of a block of flats, and he met Stephen Mann there. They then changed boxed up what they could and changed it into whatever, so it was manageable. Then went to a flat in North London.
As the revelations poured in, Mann alleged that there was more than just one member of the Viccei family involved.
Stephen Mann said Viccei's father was waiting for him. We didn't have any corroboration on that.
We were aware that the father was in this country, yes. And I do think there was a reference to the fact that the father had been at the flat that Viccei was using.
As rumours circulated that Viccei hadn't worked alone and had enjoyed his newfound wealth with his father, the police got a breakthrough with the centre owner, Latif, from one of Viccei's other associates.
We went through Pincus's stuff. We found telephone bills from Israel to the centre.
Before his arrest, Viccei had eluded the police and fled to Israel. But why would he have been calling the security centre?
That's when we realised that Latif was involved.
Scotland Yard was facing one of Britain's biggest heists ever. £40 million worth of valuables had been stolen by an Italian armed robber. After weeks of surveillance, officers had their #1 suspect, Valerio Viccei, in custody. Viccei was claiming no one else was involved, but his associates were telling a different tale. And the police were about to uncover exactly how the whole operation was possible.
So you arrested Latif. What he said to us was, well, it's a relief. I'm now going to tell you all about it. I want to cooperate. And basically, he was saying that Viccei had forced him to do it. And that was going to be his defence.
The security centre owner, Parvez Latif, had lied. His alibi crumbled when police discovered Viccei had been calling him regularly from abroad to check on the investigation.
Latif was a very good target. He'd reduced the cost of the premiums for customers and still couldn't get any business. At the time of the robbery, I think they had 800 boxes in use out of 4,000. Latif was getting desperate. He'd already lost £500,000. Although he came from a wealthy Pakistani family, he lived quite a flash life, which he had to sustain. Other people, I think, were scared of Viccei, which might explain the power and the hold he had over people like Latif.
The business was not being run properly as such. It was going down the pan. He owed money. Viccei had promised him a third of the proceeds.
To make matters worse, Latif was about to find out that it wasn't only his business Viccei had stolen.
Viccei had an affair with Latif's girlfriend.
That was all to do with his ego and a bit on the side as such. He could do it. He could prove that I could take her away from Latif. It was as easy as that. Yeah, he used her for a while. I don't think he was too bothered about her.
As the revelations continued, the elaborate details of Viccei's plan finally came to light.
Knightsbridge was opportunist because he met Latif and he became the inside agent and he wined and dined him. You know, I'd say the modern expression now is he groomed him, you know.
Viccei had his sights on the prize the moment he was told about the centre by a Russian acquaintance. Latif was just a pawn in his game. Viccei was meticulous in his planning. He spent months meeting Latif, offering him bribes as a sweetener until he had him on side. Viccei also rented his own box at the centre to gain entry and check out the security.
And this company, despite the fact where it was in the middle of Knightsbridge, a great temptation for rich people to put their stuff away safely, wasn't doing well. Enter Viccei, who is swaggering. You can imagine how effective he would have been in dominating Latif. He persuaded Latif, I think, to put up his insurance premiums and put his own guns and money into the safe deposit box about 2 months before the actual robbery. So again, it was a good way of getting to look round the place. And Latif, very obligingly, didn't take down his name and address or ask for any proof of identity. Very dangerous thing to do in the circumstances.
These discrepancies allowed Viccei free rein to plot his perfect crime. Day in, day out, he sat going over his plan in minute detail, covering every eventuality.
One mustn't lose sight of Viccei. He planned. He planned his robberies. You would expect that. It took time, Knightsbridge, let alone to time it the way that he did time it, although it didn't work out for him exactly on the day. The vehicles that were bought, the different premises that were used.
They've looked at the place they're going to rob. They've seen how people go past it. They've watched the routines of people who work there. So they know that to a second the time that they've got.
But on the day, not everything went according to Viccei's meticulous plan. The first mistake came when he tried to call the gang member posing as a security guard outside.
He was wandering around out the front. Tried to call him.
Lead it to Foreman!
Wasn't paying attention. Let's say they didn't communicate.
Despite hours of planning, the fake guard had made a rookie error. The volume on his radio was turned down.
Viccei couldn't believe it. Slapped him a few times. I wasn't listening to the radio.
And the mistakes didn't stop there. Before the raid could begin, Viccei called for his final accomplice, also outside.
He wanted the van, and he couldn't get a response. He had to leave the vault. He goes out and then bumps into a uniformed police officer.
Viccei could have been rumbled before he'd even begun, but he made a split-second decision.
You know, he just had to front it up, but, you know, other people might have panicked. They were so lackadaisical, you know, and casual about it, and that's why they made mistakes. By the time they got back, the police by then had disappeared because the police had been there for totally different reasons. That's your luck sometimes, you know.
But luck wasn't all on Viccei's side. The police were about to learn exactly how his bloodstained fingerprint ended up in the vault.
the boxes. They did need banging, they really did need some hitting. Then you've got to pull them out, and that's why when they were rushing, that's why he cut his finger. Quite a deep cut.
If Viccei had not cut his finger on the lock of one of the safe deposit boxes, he probably would have got away with it.
It was this simple error by Viccei himself that eventually led the police straight to him. Officers also discovered how the gang had managed to smash open the steel security boxes.
You're presented with a box. If you haven't got a key, you've got to force it open. It's as easy as that. And he made a tool. They had to hit the lock in a certain way to break it in one. I mean, if you're spending, 5 minutes breaking one box, another 5 minutes, another. It's like the films. It's a dream, isn't it? You're in a deposit box and you've got hours, and you can just break them all open at willy-nilly and select what you want.
They may have managed to break open the boxes, but the gang's raid was flawed in many ways. Along with his own slip-ups, the crew Viccei selected were also to blame for his downfall.
He playing what he thought was meticulous, but because it's up to the players on the day. And he knew that they were a liability, maybe. If they'd had their radios tuned in and they just were half awake, then he wouldn't have had the delays and so on.
Mr. Parvez Latif.
As well as their errors during the robbery, some of Viccei's associates were quick to roll over once the police came knocking.
Everybody has to look after themselves. Viccei looked after himself in certain respects. But that's what happens in these cases, where you have a number of defendants, suddenly dog eats dog.
As officers questioned suspects and built the case, the revelations kept coming.
4 days he spent sorting out all the gear, dividing up into whatever. The watches, the stones, and all the money went into the bath, which he says was about £1 million.
True to his Playboy image, Viccei spent days reveling in his newly acquired wealth. But he also slipped up once he had the goods in his possession.
We got a lot of property back. We found different deposit boxes with watches, stones, etc., etc. He's got his firearms back.
Despite his carelessness, he wasted no time cashing in his spoils, selling items around the world.
He was travelling in and out of Europe. He went to Switzerland to broker the deal for the diamonds. He then went to Antwerp, Belgium, and then he met people there that introduced him to the Israelis.
He obviously had travelled a lot, and he obviously knew the byways of Europe, where you could get rid of diamonds, places like Antwerp, where you could move money easily. And he'd been involved with the drug world then, and now is a very good way of transporting stuff and building up connections as well.
And this wasn't Viccei's first job in the UK. He'd been a busy man since arriving on our shores just 18 months previously. Detectives discovered he was responsible for at least 5 other armed robberies in London, netting him over £250,000. These helped fund work on the Knightsbridge job. One raid had taken place at the illustrious Coutts Bank just months before.
Because they're dressed in motorcycle helmets. Viccei's got his Beretta waving it around. All the customers sitting on the floor, hands up and so on, terrified. He got £26,000 out of that, and then he jumped on their motorbikes and off and away, He was spending a lot of money. He was using coke. He still had bills to pay. He was living in a hotel and womanising. He was a robber. He got a buzz out of it, couldn't stop doing it.
The main Knightsbridge trial was long and eventful. It took years to track certain gang members around the world. David Poole received 16 years for robbery. Peter O'Donoghue 11. Israel Pincus got 10 years for receiving stolen goods. As for the 2 informants, Stephen Mann received 5 years, whilst the centre owner, Parvez Latif, got 18 years. Ringleader Valerio Viccei received 22 years for robbery and possessing a firearm. Eric Rubin fled to Israel but was eventually extradited and given 12 years in 1991. Despite Stephen Mann's allegations, Viccei's father was never charged. Although Viccei received a lengthy sentence, it did nothing to calm his cocky attitude.
He was reading the Guinness Book of Records, waiting for the jury to come back, just boning up on where he stood as far as the biggest heist was. Amazing.
He liked to be known as the one that had done it. He wasn't ashamed of the fact. He was very proud of the fact that he was an Italian who'd come across and done the biggest robbery of all time.
What I think is dangerous with someone like Viccei is to glorify him, is to talk about him as a high, I use the expression highwayman, and I think it would be very dangerous to turn him into some sort of cult figure or a sort of mythical figure. He was a bank robber, or a robber certainly, an armed robber, quite good at what he did, ruthless, and he could well have killed people if he'd had to. And I think one should always bear that in mind when you see the gold chain and the big smile in the pictures.
With the main culprit and his accomplices in prison, the police investigation was a success. But of the estimated £40 million worth of goods stolen, only a fraction was ever recovered.
9 people are being questioned by police in London investigating last month's raid on safe deposit boxes in Knightsbridge. They also say they found several £1 million worth of cash, silver and jewellery.
We know what we recovered, about £10 million worth of property.
30 of the owners never went to the police, so nobody has any idea what was in those boxes.
We also know that there was 24 to 26 kilos of scrap gold that went into Hatton Garden and was melted down. Now, that scrap gold consisted of the bangles and chains and so on that the original jewellery had been in.
It was a suggestion that, in fact, Viccei and his friends had robbed other members of the underworld. So it's quite possible that the Knightsbridge safety deposit boxes also held some of the secrets of the underworld as well.
As for the rest of the loot...
He never did say what had happened to it. He said it was in a safe place, but that was it. It was obviously not going to divulge where it was.
Despite being locked up in prison, Viccei never stopped trying to make a name for himself.
He asked if he could write a book about his actual robbery.
Most criminals would not write books. I mean, it's their business, it's their livelihood. You don't give away your trade secrets to the other side. Viccei couldn't care less.
I said to him, well, you know, why the Knightsbridge job? And he said, well, he wanted to be known as the one who'd done the biggest robbery in history. And that was his main motivation for it. The money obviously was part of it, but his main kick in life was that he was going to be the #1 criminal in the world.
After writing a book on his crimes while in prison, Viccei was eventually sent back to Italy in 1992 to serve the remainder of his sentence. 8 years later, his life of crime came to an untimely end. He was just 45 years old.
And then, of course, eventually ended up in Pescara, and then he was getting parole, weekend leave, and of course then he couldn't leave it alone. He got involved with another couple of guys in a car in the mountains up near where he was living at the time.
2 Italian traffic policemen came up, saw the car, were suspicious and stopped them. There was an exchange of gunfire. Viccei seriously wounded one of the policemen and then walked over to kill him. And the policeman shot him back, got there first with a submachine gun and hit him 12 times. Why not just run? Why not just walk away? Why not escape? But to go over and just calmly plan to shoot him is quite cold-blooded, quite... Again, it's all part of this sort of image that he cultivated. If Viccei hadn't decided to be so cold-blooded and come over and kill the policeman, he could easily have got away and survived that. The twist for Viccei is here's the man who committed one of the world's biggest robberies, and certainly one of the biggest robberies ever committed in Britain, dies at the hands of a wounded policeman in the Italian countryside, hardly recognised or known. In fact, after he was killed, it took the police some time to work out who he was, which must have really galled him.
And that was the end of him. Bye-bye, Valerio.
The 4th of April 1983 went down in British criminal history when a gang of armed robbers raided a high security depot in London nicknamed Fort Knox.
At the time, it was the biggest cash robbery in this country.
This team were obviously regarded as being the top echelon of robbers.
The heist was executed with military precision. The robbers carefully planned their attack and fled without a trace.
It seemed to be completely devoid of any clues. They just seemed to have vanished with the money.
They held the guards captive for an agonizing 8 hours and then stole almost £7 million. But how did they do it? This is the unbelievable story of the Security Express heist. Easter Monday, April 1983. Security Supervisor Greg Counsell was starting his early morning shift at the Security Express depot in Shoreditch, London.
Greg Counsell was the controller for the day, and he came in to work very early, took over from the other controller. His job was to allow people to come into the secure part of the building, and generally he would sit there monitoring the cameras.
It was no normal day at the office. The bank holiday meant the depot was awash with cash as they waited for the banks to reopen the following day. Greg waited for the other guards to arrive before allocating the workload.
And it was on Easter Monday. There was a big prize there because of the Daily Mail exhibition at Earl's Court. That would bring in a lot of money every year.
So millions of pounds had to be handled that day. Each guard would be busy. As Greg waited for the first of the 7 men to arrive, he went about his usual routine.
At one stage, he got up to go and get a pint of milk that was just outside the back door near a place where the wheelie bins were stored.
It was a routine move that Greg did on most shifts, but it was about to change his life forever.
One of the guards used to come out of the morning to get his cuppa and go to the other control box where they had a trap in the wall. The milkman used to leave the bottles of milk, but in doing so, he had to come out of the main building and switch all the security off and all the sensors. So there was the chink in the armour.
He just opened the back door, stretched out to get the pint of milk, and he was then pounced on by 6 people, all balaclavaed up.
Greg had no time to react. A gang of armed robbers pounced on him. He was led back into the depot at gunpoint and now feared for his life.
He was then taken back to the control room where he was held for hours.
The security supervisor was ordered to sit back at his station and remain calm. He was still the only man on duty, but unbeknown to him, the armed gang had a detailed plan.
He was actually put by his desk, but 2 of the robbers hid themselves underneath his desk with a shotgun aimed at his crutch piece. And that's where he sat for a long while letting his fellow colleagues come in one by one.
The pressure on Greg was immense. 7 other men were due on duty, and he knew that it took more than one guard to access the millions of pounds stored in the vaults. But so too did the robbers.
You got to get the guards to tell you exactly what's what, and what you open first or second or third, or what keys you put in, which way you turn them, panic buttons and alarm buttons.
And it appeared that the robbers even knew detailed knowledge of the premises, the security cautions they take, the locks, the keys.
He did a good job in a way, because he was told not to look up and not to see any faces, because if someone comes in the main entrance and they get a look, there was nothing to stop them running back out the door and raising the alarm. So that was a crucial moment. Everyone who walked through that door, which had to be monitored really exclusively. And poor old Greg had a shooter up his Niagaras, so he had to do as he's told, didn't he, you know?
Okay.
Really, what made it even more devastating was the fact that they were there so long. Security guards were coming in every half an hour. They were confronted by a shotgun, and they were then put at the back, and it just seemed impossible that no one had noticed something untoward going on.
So the pressure was on. Guard after guard arrived for their shift, with Greg dutifully letting them in. The hours ticked by and the phones rang as usual. But remarkably, Greg managed to keep it together, despite being held at gunpoint.
Who's that? It's my wife.
And they were all laid down, they was all looked after. It was lunchtime, wasn't it? So that's been a long morning, you know, and the phones never stopped ringing.
Bye-bye.
The firm must have known that the time was running out.
The robbers laid in wait for over 7 hours, working with military precision. Each guard now lay helpless in the locker room. All but one man was accounted for, and he held the vital information they were after.
Jamie Alcock was the custodian with the keys. He had to take over the keys and know what to do with them, how to put the keys into the locks, and things like that.
But the last guard wasn't about to give up his information easily.
And one was the stubborn old boy who was being a bit clever. Of course, they had a little can of a lighter fluid. And he's told to behave himself, otherwise he's going to be set alight if he didn't tell the truth.
A gang of 6 armed robbers had burst into a security express depot in London, ready to steal millions of pounds. But it wasn't nicknamed Fort Knox for nothing. They controlled the building, but had to force every guard in there to cooperate in order to reach the money. And the last guard was going to be their biggest hurdle.
The robbers particularly wanted Jamie Alcock to come into the premises, although they had to wait for all the personnel to come in because they couldn't allow anyone to come in after they'd started removing the cash. But Alcock was the one they wanted because I think they had the information that he was the second key holder for that day. So therefore, they needed him to be there to give them the combination of the keys.
If he didn't tell the truth about where the keys were, the whole business is blown. It was a very touchy situation.
Time was running out. The robbers had been waiting for over 7 hours for the final guard to clock on. He was the only one who knew the whereabouts of the vault keys.
When they first asked Jamie Alcock to produce the second set of keys to open the vaults, he originally gave them a blank. It's not me, it's not me. And then the robbers got a little bit terse with him, and it then turned to extreme violent behaviour.
By this time, the gang was wound up. They had spent months crafting their plan. Now, one man was standing in their way.
They got a can of petrol and started to pour it over him, and somebody produced a box of matches threatening to set him alight.
He knew where they were, and he wouldn't say where they were, so that's why he had the treatment with the lighter fuel, you know. But he wasn't harmed, he wasn't hurt.
Well, of course, Mr. Alcock had no option then but to get the second set of keys, and at that particular stage, it was getting rather nasty.
Alcock was now badly shaken. He had been doused in petrol and terrorized. Although unharmed, he realized the robbers meant business. He had to cooperate. The gang now had all the pieces of the jigsaw. They grabbed a different guard, Alan Grimes, to put the final part of the plan into action. Their aim was to penetrate the highly secure vault, which could only be opened by a combination of keys and codes. Once inside, sealed bags were held in cages, and a further 7 safes housed even more money. But the thieves were running out of time.
They made him open up the vaults. I mean, the security there was tremendous, but you had to have someone to do it, to open it up for him.
The pressure was now mounting. No vans had left the depot for over 8 hours. Phones were ringing off the hook with customers wondering where the guards were. All but one were bound and gagged in the depot. The robbers had limited time to get to the millions of pounds.
It's a long procession to get to the vaults themselves. Once they saw all those cages full up with plastic folders full of cash, you know, every cage is full up with money, and there was cage after cage of them. Between 6 and 7 million pounds was cleared out. All that was left was silver, I think, at the end.
The firm wasted no time loading the contents of the vault into their waiting van. Nearly £7 million was removed in just 20 minutes.
Once you're in there, you're not going to run out and leave £200,000 or £300,000 in a bag. It's only a matter of throwing them on, isn't it? You've got to clear it out.
But as the van sped away, one gang member nearly blew their whole operation.
On the way out, one got nearly trapped in the door because the doors was closing on him, and he got stuck in just at the last moment, because he had to run across the yard from the box, press the button and then run and get out. Of course, the vans and the car had already gone, the van with the money, and they're just the car outside waiting for him.
And then there was silence. The guards were left bound and gagged. Millions of pounds had been stolen whilst they lay there helpless, and the police had no idea until one of the guards struggled free and raised the alarm.
When I actually got to the premises, there was at least 8 of the security staff. They were all in various places, being interviewed by officers. You could see various items, like stockings. The guards' helmets were left on the floor. And then when you went in the vaults, of course, there was turmoil there. The whole thing was just in chaos, really.
The highly organised gang wasted no time in fleeing to a secret location.
There's not many places you can drive a big vehicle in. there's too many nosy people around in town. It's got to be out in the sticks a little bit, where you can pull down a few lanes and then pull into somewhere where you've got no neighbours or something.
Police were now in a race against time to draw up a list of potential suspects.
I think from the outset we knew it was a real professional team, and probably an old-fashioned team, a mature team. They seemed to be well in control of the guards. They knew exactly what to do and say and how to frighten the guards into doing what they were told.
So professional was the gang that they left no way of tracing them at the scene. By the time the police were looking for clues, the thieves were tallying up their new fortune.
I was invited on board to help. The money went back to a barn where the money was laid out on trestles and divided up into different sections and parcels. Everyone was in charge of their own particular money, you know. It's very nice, but you couldn't even put anything in your pocket and take it home with you, could you, Or go home and say, go out and buy yourself a new car. You have to keep very quiet about it, don't you? Very stum.
With the money in hand, the gang asked Freddie Foreman, a prominent member of the London underworld, on board to help handle the vast amount of cash. Meanwhile, the investigation quickly grew into one of Scotland Yard's largest ever. They needed results, and officers were desperate for clues.
There was immense pressure to capture these people, so much so that I think most of the members of the flying squad, and I think there was 80 plus, that were actually engaged on it right from the beginning. There was hardly anything left there at all. It seemed to be completely devoid of any clues. They just seemed to have vanished with the money.
And whilst officers were put on the back foot with no forensic leads at the depot, the cash was divided and taken deeper into the gang's network.
We were fortunate enough to have an office in the building where the money was kept. And had tea and sandwiches and counting machines and things. And of course, all marked money has to be disposed of if the bank staff have marked it in any particular way. So that can get you arrested and nicked later on, So you have to go through it all, really, as best as you can.
As Foreman counted the cash, detectives started to pick up on other leads.
We were doing a bit of proactive policing, setting up surveillance points on various teams. One of the bits of information we had concerned a particular pub in Stoke Newington called the Albion. And then Foreman had phoned us to say that people who were frequenting that were involved in the robbery. We'd set up an observation point which lasted for months and months, and we did in fact see 3 or 4 people that were already in our system who had been put forward as potential suspects for the robbery.
The officers on the flying squad, they'd been there years. They knew the notable families in the East End or London, full stop, who would be capable of committing this type of robbery. We just put all the names in forward. We would go out and do work on them and come back and decide whether we actually went and did searches, arrested them, brought people in, did some interviews. But it was very difficult because the fact is that we had no evidence.
The flying squad were now on the trail of several suspects, but had little to go on other than their hunch. Meanwhile, Foreman was carefully making plans.
It's very difficult. I mean, if you've got a large amount of money, to leave it somewhere where you know it's going to be safe. I actually did have somewhere. I had a friend who was in the city, and he was in charge of an office block. It used to be a bank on the ground floor, so the basement still had the vaults and the safes, same as the Security Express in a sense, you know. So the money went from one vault to another vault for safety, and that was, it should have been left there, really, for indefinitely. It would have been a much better idea, I suppose.
The hunt for the missing millions was on. No forensic leads were coming from the depot. But how had the gang managed to break into the building?
I don't think any team of that quality would ever commit a robbery without detailed knowledge of the premises, the security cautions they take, the locks, the keys, and not many people apart from mid-management or higher would know all these details. There was absolutely no doubt in our minds that there was somebody very senior that had given this team inside information. And it appeared that the robbers even knew details of the families of these guards. So, you know, to know the whole outline, it appeared that there was somebody higher up than these guards.
But all inquiries on an inside man drew a blank. Months of surveillance on suspects were going cold with no new evidence. Meanwhile, Foreman was working hard not to change his lifestyle. Whilst his chunk of the money was stored safely, he went about his business as usual.
I was still living in the same flat. I had businesses, I had betting shops, I had casinos, I had pubs, clubs. I'm entitled to have a bit of cash. I could account for quite a lot of it. My intentions were to live in Spain and America. When I went to America, I was near up a dollar millionaire.
But detectives were digging deeper for clues. So Foreman worked hard not to arouse suspicion.
So I never changed my lifestyle at all in London. I still had the same car. I had an Audi, I think, at the time, and someone had run into the back of me. And it was all bented and doubled up, and I thought, no, I won't get it fixed. I'll leave it like it is, you know.
While Foreman was keeping his head down, officers were getting closer to some of the other suspects. And this was about to pay off. Detectives finally got the breakthrough they desperately needed.
There was a wall with screws, and as we took the top half of the wall away, turned it round, there was some writing on it, and what it was figures, starting with £400,000. Behind the wall was 3 canvas sacks, and they were full of money, full of notes.
An armed gang of robbers had ambushed a Security Express depot and fled with millions of pounds. The thieves had left no forensic clues, and all police knew was that this was the biggest cash robbery ever to hit the UK. But now, after months of drawing blanks, their surveillance was about to pay off.
The initial breakthrough was when a vehicle was found in the East End, in Hackney, I believe it was. As a result of that, we went back over what we'd done in Hackney, and it was very, very close to a garage proprietor who we'd looked at and had been visited by people who we eventually arrested.
It didn't happen right away. It happened some months later when some fella, never met him, didn't know him, but a friend of John Knight's, I think it was. He was the one who sort of started the ball rolling.
The man in question was John Horsley, a garage owner who appeared to be well connected to the underworld.
I don't know exactly how it came about, but it wasn't anybody that I knew directly, you know, at the time.
His house was searched, and during the search of his house, it was found that he's financially, he wasn't very well off. In fact, he was in debt up to his eyeballs. Couldn't pay his gas, his electric. All of a sudden, he acquired a lot of money, paid his bills off, took his wife and family on holidays, all had cars, and were living a life for Riley.
Police knew they were onto something. They put pressure on Horsley to explain his dramatic change in lifestyle.
Right from the outset, Horsley denied everything, but when officers were putting to him photographs, who he met, the days he met, the number of days he met people, the number of days he met these convicted robbers. It was then that he realised that the situation was very dire for him, and he more or less confessed everything.
He told us that his part of the robbery was that he'd been asked if there was anywhere he could give as a storage place. He offered his garage, which he owned, and the gentleman who asked him if he could have a storage place asked for both or all the keys that he had to the garage, and he said it would be well looked after for the use of the garage. He gave him 2 keys. The people went away. He then turned up when they asked him to help unload a van, which was full of very large canvas bags, which all went into Mr. Horsley's garage and was then locked, and away they went.
And the revelations weren't going to stop there. Horsley had snitched, but his further confessions were going to shock even the gang members.
Mr. Horsley, unfortunately, told a little lie. He still had 1 key. And that night he went back to the garage, went into it, opened some of his torn sacks, and found they were all full of money. So in his own statement, he said he helped himself to a few £1,000, and away he went.
With Horsley now freely giving information, detectives pushed to find the new whereabouts of the cash. Searches on his garage revealed it was long gone from there.
Mr. Horsley then decided to tell us that he'd been asked to look after one of the robbers' share of the money, to count it, look after it, put it in a safe place so that it was available when he needed money. What he told us was that his father-in-law was an old age pensioner, and within his flat in a warden control place, he'd put a false wall that allegedly the father-in-law didn't know about, and behind that wall was 3 bags of money. So it was then that Mr. Wilton decided we would go out there and then and search his father-in-law's house. But we were told it would be money. We needed tolls and bags to get the money. Turned up, went into an old age pensioner's flat. First thing we noticed was the pool table where Mr. Horsley said he'd counted the money on. And secondly, went into a room and there was a wall with screws freshly in it, which we undid. And as we took the top half of the wall away, turned it round, there was some writing on it, and what it was figures starting with £400,000, and it was then like withdrawals that basically the gentleman who committed the robbery would take. Yeah. Behind the wall was 3 canvas sacks, and they were full of money, full of notes.
The interrogations didn't stop there. Horsley was a man at breaking point, but would he give up his all-important contacts?
Mr. Horsley, in his disclosure to us, had named the people who had turned up, or some of the people he knew. It was a massive breakthrough, and it was the start of the arrests of the main players within the robbery.
The police had their breakthrough. Horsley admitted his link with Billy Hickson, a local gangster with a string of convictions for robbery, and Terence Perkins, hard man from North London with 1 previous minor conviction. Both men were known to the police and potentially dangerous. But officers didn't stop there.
It was Mr. Perkins' money, which was behind the wall. The money was a large breakthrough because we had no evidence. We now have evidence of cash that came from that robbery.
They now had 1 suspect definitely linked with the cash found. But the firm were about to discover they had another supergrass amongst them.
Horsley mentioned another man who was on the periphery, a man called Opiola. We didn't know hardly anything about Mr. Opiola, but he gave us a bit of a clue.
The flying squad was on the verge of another massive breakthrough. Mr. Alan Opiola was to prove the next big chink in the robber's armour. Detective Chief Inspector Wilson wasted no time in bringing him in for questioning.
Our inquiries reveal that Mr. Opiola ran a garage that was owned by John Knight. So the information gathered momentum within, 4 or 5 days, And when we arrested Mr. Opiola, similarly to Horsley, he was just a minnow, and within a couple of days of being shown the fact that he had rented this van, he succumbed, and he, in fact, became a supergrass. He told us so much that he became a very, very important witness.
Opiola's information revealed he'd been leaned on by his associate to help after the robbery.
And lo and behold, Mr. Opiola deposited £30,000 notes because he'd allowed his house to be used. He stated that his house had been used for 3 or 4 days to count the money from their bags, and it took him 3 or 4 days. His bedroom was used, his wife went and stayed with the mother-in-law.
Less than 24 hours after Opiola's revelations, flying squad officers turned up at the next suspect's house. John Knight, well known to the police and business partner of Opiola's. The informants had played right into the officers' hands. The police now had their men, but would the gang reveal all? The mystery of the largest cash robbery in London was about to be cracked by Scotland Yard. The flying squad had found nearly £400,000 of the missing millions, and their informants had revealed vital secrets. Now they had key suspects in their grasp, but would they give away any clues to the heist?
When we first arrested John Knight, at his home was found a list of building societies. During the next 24 hours, 48 hours, having visited all these branches, we realised that he'd been putting large amounts of cash into these building societies after the robbery.
They were arrested, the houses searched, certain items were found and brought in, and they were all interviewed. And from there they were kept in custody as a result of the evidence we then had.
Cracks were starting to show. The main suspects gave nothing away, but evidence was mounting. Foreman knew it was time to leave.
So I thought, well, the best thing is to get over to Spain and lay low and see how it develops and see what happens. That's what I did. That's when I left. But it was a bit ominous to leave on that particular day because that was obviously recorded and knew that I left on the day that Johnny Knight was arrested.
Despite the coincidence, Foreman jetted off to start a new life in Spain.
After 9 months out there, things seemed okay, and we felt pretty safe and secure. So I started lashing out a little bit and investing a little bit of money, and on a few apartments, you know, which was used by family and friends most of the time.
And it didn't take long for officers to extend their search to foreign shores.
Right from the start, when these people were arrested, we realised that there were connections abroad, Spain, Portugal, Switzerland. We had evidence that they had accounts actually in Spain. Even while John Knight was in custody, there was efforts by him and his family to get a safe deposit box opened in Spain.
And I took off on several occasions, and I did every town in Spain and every coastal town or the whole perimeter. I mean, just for it to die down, but as soon as you came back, it was still going strong. The press, once the press get their teeth into it.
Detectives never gave up the hunt. It wasn't long before they were on Foreman's heels.
Freddie Foreman was part of the second wave of this inquiry with Ronnie Knight, John Mason, Everett. Freddie, in fact, goes back many years. When you think about the Craze, Jack the Hat, Ginger Marks, people like that, he has been in the top line of criminals in London for many, many years. We had information during the first year of our inquiry to do with Freddie Foreman, but we were so involved in preparing a case against the people we'd arrested that we had to shelve a lot of the inquiries because we just didn't have the personnel to do it. We knew he was in Spain. Spain were feeding us information of what was going on over there.
It was during inquiries in Spain regarding one of the suspects that officers stumbled across a link to Foreman.
My name never came into the frame until 9 months later when I was in Spain, when the police came to the Alcazaba and asked questions about John Knight. The manager there said, no, there's nobody by the name of John Knight's got an apartment here. So they got their papers together and put them back in their briefcase and got up to leave and got to the door. But Ronnie Knight, they said, has got an apartment here. And his big friend, Freddie. Oh, I said, has he? They came back and started the inquiry all over again.
Detectives may have got close to Foreman, but remarkably, it wasn't until 6 years later that a twist of fate brought them face to face. Little did Foreman know, British authorities had been working closely with the Spanish police to bring their suspect back to the UK.
As I was getting in the car, they pounced on me. They took me straight to Marbella police station, and they banged me up downstairs in a cage with a load of smackheads and different Moroccans and different nationalities. I said, I want my lawyer over here to just send over for my lawyer, because nobody knew they had me. And next thing I knew, I was in the car, handcuffed, racing along the carretera 90 miles an hour. And I know where we're going, to the airport. We go straight on the tarmac. We don't go through the airport terminal. Go straight on to where the plane's waiting to taxi off. But it was empty, there was no one else on it. I broke away from him and I went into the terminal over the barrier, and all the people were queuing up waiting to come on board. I thought the more I kicked off, the more commotion I caused, they wouldn't put me on the plane, you know? They got me up the flight of stairs and I put my foot in the side of the staircase, and we all went down. Eventually they got me onto the plane and threw me down. And one of the stewards, a fella, came over and said, Mr. Foreman, he said, it's very hot, you must be thirsty, have a drink. And I lifted my head up, that's very kind of you, you know. And a beaker, and he tipped it up, and I swallowed it all down. And as soon as I swallowed it, I knew that, because there's a bitter taste. I felt myself being carried to one of the seats. They woke me up, because I was still spark out, as I saw the robbery squad coming down the plane and arrested me.
Along with the previous suspects, police now had Foreman. But getting any new information would be hard, and he wasn't about to lead them to any of the cash.
If you've got anything on me, then you show me the evidence.
We recovered a lot of cash at a relative of Mr. Horsley, but in most cases, the robbers had bought property, put money in banks. So that is why we got several officers from the fraud squad to assist us, because it seemed more of a financial case than it was any other form of evidence. But of course, the thing that let the robbers down mostly was the fact that 1 minute they were penniless, and from April the 4th of 1983, they had vast amounts of money. So, you know, it just seemed so obvious that they were engaged in this particular robbery.
It was only 360,000 they traced that had been transferred from different banks, from different places, and they could prove that. But I had businesses, so I could account for quite a lot of it.
The gang were on borrowed time. It had taken years, but Scotland Yard were finally piecing together their evidence through bank account details. But how the gang managed to infiltrate a top security depot remained a mystery until some time later.
Apparently, it wouldn't have happened without the office. The office across the alleyway at the side of the building was really the important reason why you could observe and spot this little chink in the armour, this floor. There's always a lot of involvement. There's a lot of work has to be done right the way through the night. Sleeping bags, flasks and binoculars and everything to get every little detail, you know, and the angle of the cameras and things like that. Where do you think is a blind spot?
Camera on each corner, mate.
It's not like in the movies when they come all dressed in black like ninja turtle things and they're throwing grappling hooks over the wall and scrambling up. I think they were all a bit too old for all that. So it's just to ladder up the wall and a ladder to go down the other side. And they was all taken away in the van afterwards, apparently. I don't expect any one of the firm would have thought that they would have been there for over 12 hours on the robbery, because it started at 12 o'clock on the night, got to 3 o'clock when it was able to go over the wall when it was quiet, to hole up there and wait until the morning when the first guard came on duty.
After years of detective work, officers finally had evidence linking most of the suspects to the robbery.
The trial was regarded as very serious. The magnitude of the robbery and the robbers concerned was such that they were escorted to the court every single day of the trial. 2 of the robbers got 22 years. That was John Knight and Terence Perkins. They were found guilty of the robbery. Billy Hickson actually was acquitted of the robbery and was sentenced to 6 years for handling stolen goods. James Knight was sentenced to 7 years imprisonment for handling a substantial sum of the cash. Ronnie Knight was in fact sentenced to 8 years when he surrendered and actually flew over here.
Jury finds you guilty of the robbery of £6 million.
The 2 informants also received time for their part in the robbery. John Horsley was given 8 years, and Alan Opiola 3, both for handling the money. As for Foreman, his trial was high profile and well publicized.
The prisoners were brought to the court under heavy escort every single day, and the jurors were in fact given police protection throughout the trial. That's how serious it was regarded, and that's how serious the gang involved were.
Well, I didn't expect me to get guilty of anything. You'd find you guilty of handling, you know. 9 years. I had to serve 6 years of that, you know.
I think in all, 5 or 6 of the main robbers were sentenced to some term of imprisonment.
The hunt for the missing loot was over. Scotland Yard had managed to cage a number of top London gangsters, but how much of the £6.5 million was ever recovered?
We recovered certain amounts of cash, but the inquiry then was taken over by insurance companies, and they retrieved large amounts through the houses belonging to the robbers, houses they bought in Spain, Portugal and other places. All in all, I believe that nearly £3 million was recovered.
It was one of the first cases of criminal bankruptcy where the insurance company then decided to go after the people who'd been convicted and seize their assets.
This was a robbery that shook London. It took the authorities over 7 years to recover less than half the cash. The whereabouts of the rest of the money remains a mystery. But despite the gang's planning and skill, most were brought to justice.
There is no doubt that the guards on that day had been put through sheer hell, because the fact that they had been held in the premises by these robbers for so long must have caused them great anxiety.
All the guards suffered trauma, but went on to recover from their ordeal over time. Despite initial suspicions, no Security Express employee has ever been linked with the robbery.
The gang were big, hard men because they lived in an area where they had to be, and they were respected in that way by other villains. People would not mess with them because of their notoriety.
I did have sort of two lives. I had the respectable businessman with the pubs and the betting shops and the casino and the nightclubs. And then there was the other side, the darker side. The pressure on my family was immense. Or long periods away from home, in prison. You know, it's a long time out of anybody's life. There's quite a number of things in life which I regret doing, definitely.
Foreman spent many years behind bars, but it hasn't changed his outlook on life.
I don't really feel guilty about anything I did. I felt justified in what I'd done. But it was all survival. It's survival of the fittest. It's a dog-eat-dog world, the criminal world. But, you know, that's life.
In November 1983, 6 armed robbers slipped into a maximum security warehouse near Heathrow, hoping to take away with them £1 million in cash.
I thought to myself, well, you know, are they going to just take the goods and go, or are they going to kill us at the same time?
They poured the petrol down over my chest, and I was told in no uncertain terms, if the alarms went off or the police turned up, they'd put a match to me and put a bullet through the back of my head.
What they got away with was gold bullion worth a staggering £26 million. But how did they do it? This is the story of the Brinks-Mat bullion heist and the hunt for the missing gold.
Biggest ever armed robbery was carried out at the Brinks-Mat Security Depot at Heathrow. The gang escaped with £26 million worth of gold bars, weighing nearly 3 tons.
This was a huge amount of gold, almost conquistador proportions. To give some sort of perspective, it was the weight of 2 average family saloon motor cars.
The biggest ever robbery in British criminal history.
One of the most audacious robberies ever carried out in Britain.
Offence, £26 million worth of gold stolen in Britain's biggest ever robbery.
Must have been a large and well-organised operation.
To be honest, I was in complete fear of my life and also the lives of my colleagues, especially when they tell you where you live and then they tell you how to get into your own vault. And that is the most scary part of it. They knew so much.
They took with them the secret of where the haul is hidden.
But of course, by stealing the gold, the robbers then had a problem of how to actually filter that gold back into the system and make that gold turn into cash.
Ruthless in its conception, fearless in its operation, the Brinks-Mat heist is still the largest bullion robbery in British criminal history. In just 15 minutes, a highly organised South London gang of armed robbers made off with 3 tons of gold from the Fort Knox-style warehouse near Heathrow.
It was the biggest crime or robbery that I've ever been involved in. And dare I say it, it was a watershed crime in the criminal history of this country.
It was a Saturday morning on the 26th of November, 1983. The start of the early morning shift at the Brinks-Mat warehouse. Security Supervisor Mike Scouse had to wait until precisely 6:30 a.m. to open the doors to his team of security guards, Robin Risley, Richard Holliday, Peter Bentley, and Ron Clark.
Being based at Heathrow Airport, we handled a lot more high-value goods. We handled banknotes, we also handled diamonds, gold bars, precious metals, and anything of high value. Every day was different. Some days it was pennies, other day it was millions.
When you pick up, say, £5 million, it doesn't register as £5 million. To be honest, you didn't worry about the value. You worried more about the pound in your back pocket, because the pound in your back pocket belonged to you.
Once in, the security guards went about their normal routines.
One of the lads was making the tea, as per usual, and the others were getting their bits and pieces together, security equipment, etc. We then got the various books out and the keys, and we started to discuss what was going on.
We're going through the airway bills and sort of just doing a rough calculation, and we realised there was an awful lot of gold to be moved that morning.
And the vehicle that had been allocated couldn't really take the weight, it was just over 3 tonne.
The gold had been delivered to the warehouse in 76 stacked boxes on pallets, shortly after the security guards had clocked off work the night before. It was a staggering amount they were expected to handle that day.
The doorbell went at about 20 to 7, so I then went downstairs and saw Tony Black outside. He was on his own, so I opened up the door.
Not for the first time, the 5th member of the security team, Tony Black, arrived 10 minutes late.
He looked a little bit dishevelled, like he'd just got out of bed. His timekeeping wasn't one of the best.
No sooner he was upstairs, he said, "Oh, his son dying to go to the loo. I'm going downstairs."
I'm going downstairs.
As Mike Scouse busied himself in the radio room trying to work out how best to transport the gold to the airport, the other security guards were gearing themselves up for the task ahead.
Tony Black joined me. He was rolling a cigarette. And all of a sudden there's an almighty commotion going on.
Next thing, this voice said, "On the floor." And I looked round, and there was a guy with a trilby hat on, with a gun. And I thought, well, what the hell are you doing here? And a hood or bag was placed over the head. I was then asked to put the hands behind the back, and handcuffs were put on quite hard. And then I just laid there.
I could hear these tables and chairs being kicked over, and then I just turned round, and there's this man running at me with a ski-type balaclava mask on, holding a semi-automatic pistol in his hand. He was yelling at me in no uncertain terms to get down on the floor. And that's when I looked at Tony Black and I just said, "Who the blankety blank's he?" Then next minute, we're both on the floor. I'm handcuffed, hooded, got a good kicking as well. And then I was dragged up. I was then told to breathe in, and using a knife they cut the belts, pushed the clothes up over my chest and put a small can of petrol under my hood and said, "You know what that is?" I said, "Petrol." And then they poured the petrol down over my chest. And of course it ran down over the extremities, and petrol burns. I was told in no uncertain terms to stay there. If the alarms went off or the police turned up, they'd put a match to me and put a bullet through the back of my head.
Unknown to Mike Scouse, Robin Risley was also being dealt with in a similar treatment. But why had the gang singled out these two? Brink's Mat was no ordinary warehouse. It was one of the most secure buildings in Britain, containing 3 of the world's toughest safes. To get to them, once inside the warehouse, it was necessary to pass through a locked and alarmed vault door using 2 sets of keys and combination numbers, and then through a gate. Once inside the vault, the safes could only be opened by a further set of keys and combination numbers. The building was protected by several alarm systems. No single employee of Brinks Mat knew which keys and which combination of numbers deactivated all the doors or alarm systems. But these men knew exactly who they needed to get to the cash: Mike Scouse and Robin Risley. They were the ones who knew the combinations to the Brinks Mat high security vault.
I think I was able to get my combination to work. Robin wasn't. He gave me his combination and I still couldn't get it off. So then he was forced to do it. They then sat me on a metal box and one man forcibly holding me down with a gun in my ear.
You could hear sort of muffled voices downstairs, but again, I assumed that it must have been Michael and Robin with the robbers, because they're the two most important people in the depot on that morning. I didn't really know what was going on.
The codes were changed regularly and without warning, so Scouse and Risley were often required to memorize their half of new combination numbers.
Well, inside the vaults, we'd got 3 smaller safes. They had a combination number and a key. I had the key and Robin had the combinations, but they'd only just recently been changed and he couldn't remember them. They were really going to town on Robin and they threatened to castrate him. I think, to be honest, they would have done that. And then in the end, I could hear matches being struck because Robin had also got petrol on him and I'm sitting soaked in petrol myself.
With their patience at breaking point, the robbers were unaware of the colossal fortune right under their noses in the 76 stacked boxes. Instead, they were intent on the 3 large safes containing over £1 million in cash. But Risley was in a panic and simply couldn't remember the combination.
I was trying to defuse the situation, so I called out, "Leave me alone." It's like that during the week. With that comment, I was told to have him well shut up, and I was forced back on the metal box and the gun was forcibly put into my ear, and I was told, "Shut up and stay there."
With the atmosphere becoming more charged, Scouse and Risley feared for their lives. Things were not going according to plan. At that point, the gang looked around to see what else they could take.
There's a brown cardboard box there which had got palladium in. I think they took it. There's also a small 50-gallon drum but cut down, and they took the top off and it got plastic bags of pure silver granules in it. And they asked me what was it. So I just said, "It's shit." So they left it.
What happened next would change British criminal history. In November 1983, 6 armed robbers had come determined to steal around £1 million in cash from the Brinks Mat warehouse. Instead, they committed the biggest bullion robbery in British history.
They knew so much. To be honest, I could have written down the combination numbers, given them the keys and sat upstairs and had a cup of tea. They told me how to get into my own vault.
They were very well practiced in what they did. It was a military type operation, driven by adrenaline and armed as well. The criminal world in London in the 80s was highly organised. They had a distinct hierarchy of criminal, and those type of criminals that were committing armed robbery on an organised scale were top of the tree.
There's a lot of shouting going on inside the vaults, and then they obviously found the gold bullion that was there.
Having violently terrorised the guards, the gang stumbled across 6,800 pure gold ingots, each weighing just under 400 grams, and each bar worth around £3,000. The haul was getting on for 3 tons, with a value in the region of £26 million.
Now, the gold was inside the vaults. It was on pallets. So then they said, "Who can open the shutters to let a vehicle in?" And I said, "Tony Black."
Black was ordered to open the shutter doors as a vehicle drove in. The pallets, stacked with bullion, were quickly loaded onto the vans.
I was lying there, I had no idea what they'd come for, and then all of a sudden, all you heard was bang, bang, bang. And I thought, oh my God, they're taking the gold.
I still didn't know at the end of the day whether we would all live or die. And I just said to one of them, you load it a bit quicker than we do. And I just told him in no uncertain terms to shut it.
And all of a sudden, we heard this voice saying, thanks ever so much for your help and have a very nice Christmas.
As the engine noise slowly faded into the distance, the guards were left with nothing but silence.
I then gave it a couple of minutes. Then I called out to all the lads and all of them answered, so I knew that they were all alive and in one piece sort of thing. And then one of the lads was able to break his handcuffs, the link on it, and then he kicked a very large hole in the office door, and then he came into me. By then he'd, I think, released Tony Black, and then they got some a screwdriver and a hammer, and then they broke my handcuffs.
All of a sudden this voice said, keep away from the door, look out. And this size 12 boot came smashing through the door, followed by a head, and it was Peter checking if we were okay.
With the alarm raised, a flying squad team led by Detective Inspector Tony Brightwell raced to Brinksmad.
The scene at the warehouse itself, it was in total disarray. There was upturned chairs, there were masks, gags, ropes lying all over the place. There was an unbelievable stench of petrol, where petrol had been poured over the guards. The whole thing was in disarray. I should point out that the robbers had carried out this robbery and got away from the premises in a matter of 15 to 20 minutes. This was high-speed stuff. Crimes such as this cannot happen unless you have someone working for you on the inside. Now, that could be someone that was on duty at that time, it could be another person in the employ of Brinksmad, or it could be someone that's left the company. But it's right to say that even in the first minutes of us being informed of this crime, we were focusing on an inside agent. As far as the other guards are concerned, and specifically Michael Scouse, it's fair to say that they were regarded from the early moments as being involved.
Until they can actually get a suspect or charge a suspect, then basically all 6 of us were suspects.
Well, being the key man, not only did I have some of the combinations and the keys, I also had some of the passwords for the alarm companies. So I was number one suspect, if you like.
Their houses were searched, certain items would have been taken, they would have been interrogated quite forcibly to see if they were involved. They were put through the hoop, make no mistake about it.
Instead of being taken to the hospital, I was taken up to Hounslow Police Station, where they took off all my clothing for forensics.
Scouse was under investigation for several days, and it culminated in the flying squad arresting him on suspicion of being involved in this robbery.
One would ask me a question and then I would try and answer it, and then one of the others would jump in and said, 5 minutes ago you said. So then my brain would start to backtrack, what did I say 5 minutes ago? Somebody had set me up, and that was what was at the back of my mind, who's done it?
Just as it was looking like Scouse was in the frame, another man had now come to the attention of the police.
Very quickly, we made a connection with a man called Black, who was one of the guards on duty that day. His sister was living with and was the common-law wife of a man called Robinson, who was very high up in the criminal underworld of South London, was a suspected armed robber, was an organised criminal of high standing.
But the police needed evidence to prove Tony Black was the inside man.
We decided to reconstruct the events, getting each guard in turn to go through their story, but without being able to collaborate with their colleagues. There were numerous flaws in Tony Black's story, that he was claiming to have seen things taking place which he could not possibly have done so. Now, whilst filming this, we, unknown to Black, went through his jacket, which he'd hung over a chair, and removed a personal diary. And we photocopied this diary. This was to become important later. I was assigned to actually interview Black concerning his activities or his involvement on that particular morning, the sequence of events as we built up to the actual golden question, if you like, which was, how often do you see your brother-in-law, Brian Robinson? And at that stage, we introduced his diary, which at that time was totally different to what it had been 2 or 3 days beforehand.
Black had tried to disguise his involvement by falsifying his diary entries, but the police were onto him. The cracks were beginning to show as he was made to stew in his cell. But would he tell the truth? Meanwhile, news of the heist had already made headlines around the world and shaken the global gold market. The hunt for the missing bullion was well underway. But could the gold disappear without a trace? A gang of 6 armed robbers had pulled off Britain's biggest heist with an incredible gold bullion haul of £26 million, stolen from one of Britain's most impenetrable buildings, the Brink's-Mat warehouse. With the inside man reaching breaking point, the police were now on the trail for the missing gold.
Each ingot is serially numbered. The only way that you can move those ingots is first, you have to melt them to get rid of any identifying marks. But then you have to mix it in a certain way with copper, with coin, brass, in order to disguise it even further, because the only way that gold is acceptable really coming back into the market, which has to happen here, is if it's sold into the market as scrap gold.
15 days after the robbery, the police got a major tip-off. A man was going to pick up a smelter from a manufacturer in Worcester, capable of melting 36 kilos of gold bullion at any one time. For a while, police had managed to track it, but then lost sight of it. It was a huge blow to the operation. Back at Scotland Yard, the police were piling the pressure on Black. £26 million worth of gold had been stolen, and they desperately needed a confession.
It was a very difficult case, and really hinged on turning one man, which was Black. So later that evening, when we brought him out of the cell again, we saw a totally different Tony Black. It was then that he said, "I want to tell you the truth."
The flying squad now had their man. Black was about to blow the lid on the biggest bullion robbery in history.
Tony Black was a very average type of guy. I would say that he was easily led, easily impressed, but nothing really outstanding about him at all.
He always came over as quite an affable type of person. If you had any problems on your car, he used to fix it for you.
He'd only met a few people that he knew or could identify regarding the planning of this robbery, which had taken several months. It transpired that Robinson had introduced him to a man called Michael McAvoy and a man called Tony White. So they used to meet under the guise of going fishing at Leyland on the River Thames. Black had told them how many guards would be on duty. where they would be at any particular time, where the safes were, who the guards were that had the combination numbers to get into these safes. Explicit detail, detail without which you couldn't possibly have carried out this crime. To the day of the robbery, Black had overslept and panicked that he couldn't get to the warehouse in time, so he was late arriving for work. And in fact, he had met the robbers as they waited to get into the premises. Prior to the armed robbers bursting through the door, he had excused himself and gone downstairs to the toilet. He obviously, at that time, was helping the robbers into the premises.
Tony Black had committed the ultimate betrayal, putting the lives of his colleagues on the line.
I was still in bed because of my blisters. I couldn't do anything. And I was out of bed, television on, and I sat there and I shook and I shook and I shook.
I was absolutely shocked. The legs went. I managed to stand upright. I don't know how, but I managed to stay upright. And looking back now, I felt sick at that time, more sick than I did on the day of the robbery.
With the help of the newly recruited police supergrass Tony Black, detectives were now certain of some of the key players. Brian Robinson, early 40s, the criminal mastermind, otherwise known as the Colonel. Mickey McAvoy, late 30s, 5'8", and leader of the attack team. Tony White, close on 40, foot soldier, built to cause trouble, serious trouble.
This was a highly organised gang, or gangs that were carrying out these robberies. They were all known to each other. People knew that this gang had done that particular job and that person had been behind that particular job. So in terms of professional crime, it was known to the police that Robinson and McAvoy were heavily involved in armed robbery.
Whilst Robinson, McAvoy and White were arrested and questioned by the police, the pressure was on detectives to find the missing gold. 7 months after the robbery, the police got another breakthrough when a man by the name of Kenneth James Noye was brought to their attention. They were back on the gold trail.
Kenneth Noye was the mastermind and the controller of how the gold could be turned into cash. We believe that Mr. Noye came on the scene very shortly after the robbery, if indeed he didn't actually know that the robbery was going to take place.
Noye was another high-ranking, wealthy criminal with an established background in money laundering.
Noye had travelled to Jersey and had purchased 11 gold bars, exactly the same weight as the gold bars that had been stolen from the Brinksmat robbery. Each gold bar purchased in that way comes with a certificate of ownership, and each bar is serially numbered. Those bars never left Jersey.
Thank you. Pleasure doing business. Thank you. Bye-bye.
But what Noye was obviously doing was buying those gold bars to get the documentation that went with those gold bars, so that he could move 11 gold bars from the Bullion robbery around at any one time without raising suspicion should he be questioned or stopped.
Despite Noye's best efforts to avoid any suspicion, he was very much on the flying squad's radar. Undercover police officers had been watching him secretly meeting a man called Brian Reeder.
Reeder was calling at Noye's premises on an almost daily basis. And every time these two met, we ascertained that a very heavy bag was going from Noye to Reeder. Now, my team worked on this for several days and eventually followed Reeder to Hatton Garden. From there, they saw the same bags being taken down to Bristol, to a company called Scadlin. It was their job to then mix it with base metal, copper, brass, to give it the appearance, if they could, of scrap gold. and then sell it on the open market. And invariably, and in this case particularly, a lot of this gold actually ended up back with Johnson Matthey, the people that originally lost the gold in the first place.
The gold was being sold back to the company it had originally been stolen from. Now, the police investigation needed to find out how the gold was reaching Noye. Was it coming from one or more sources? Or did Noye already have all the gold? With Tony Black, the police supergrass, they lent on him to reveal more.
We asked him, where would the gold have gone to? Had you met any of the robbers in between us arresting you a week later and the robbery itself? And he said no, and I believed him. It was counterproductive for the robbers to actually meet him after the event. They wouldn't necessarily tell him where they'd stashed the gold.
Black's first test as a police supergrass was to come in the form of an ID parade.
Black would have to go and touch the likes of McAvoy on the shoulder and identify him as being involved in the Brinksmat robbery. And as Black approached him to touch him on the shoulder, he hit Black full in the face. Now that was intimidation. But thankfully, Black came through that.
Black then went on to identify Robinson and White in separate lineups. Tony Black was sent to trial at the Old Bailey and sentenced to 6 years in prison for his part in the Brinksmat heist. He served just 3. 8 months later, he testified along with Mike Scouse against Robinson, McAvoy and White, who all pleaded not guilty at the Old Bailey.
It was very tense in there. They were only a few feet away. They were surrounded by police officers and prison officers. I think they were trying to stare me out.
The jury found Robinson and McAvoy guilty, sentencing each of them to 25 years in prison.
I was quite pleased that they got a long sentence because the amount of violence and what they were capable of to myself and to the rest of the crew, they got what they deserved, to be honest.
But the jury wasn't convinced of Tony White's involvement.
Tony White was acquitted by a hair's whisker. And whiskers are the right word to use because his involvement came down to whether he had a beard on a particular day when he met Black. The jury chose to believe his version of events and he was acquitted.
With 3 of the gang now inside, but still no gold, the police were under huge pressure. What was about to happen next would have the most shocking impact on their investigation. After the conviction of gang leaders Brian Robinson, Michael McAvoy and Supergrass Tony Black, Scotland Yard detectives were determined to recover the missing gold. They had already established that from Kenneth Noye's house in West Kingsdown, Kent, Brian Reeder was collecting the gold and delivering it to a small office in London's Hatton Garden. From there, the gold was being transported down to Bedminster near Bristol, to a small bullion company called Scadlin, where it was bought, smelted, and resold back to the open market as scrap gold.
Now, a huge amount of cash, obviously, would be generated by disposing of this amount of gold. Scadlin, obviously, would have to pay for this gold. And they were a very small operation in a very small suburb/village on the outskirts of Bristol.
In a 6-month period between August 1984 and January 1985, Scadlin disposed of a staggering £13 million in gold.
They'd risen from the verge of bankruptcy to one of the primary dealers outside the main Johnson Matthey in scrap gold. So this was a huge amount of business running through this very small company because Scadlin have to pay for this gold. And the money then goes back to Noye and is disseminated to the various interested parties and criminals whose gold it belongs to. Now, in order to do that, they relied on a very small bank, a local bank, a branch bank, and this bank had to generate large amounts of cash on almost a daily basis. So in order to assist this or facilitate this, the bank had to send to London to get vast or large injections of cash to their operation in Bedminster, Bristol. We found out that a lot of this money was brand new £50 notes. The A24 series of brand new £50 notes.
Knowing these £50 notes were directly linked to the gold, all the police had to do now was to determine how the gold was reaching Noye in the first place.
A decision was taken in the higher echelons of Scotland Yard to insert officers into Noye's premises to discover if Noye had any other gold buried or hidden in his grounds or on his premises. We had to enlist the help of rural SAS-trained officers.
Detective Constables Neil Murphy and John Fordham were put on the operation.
John and myself arrived about 5 p.m, got ourselves ready to spend a whole night at the property, if necessary.
We were expecting Reader to arrive at Noye's house that night. We were expected to witness the handover of gold.
And we were given the signal to enter the property. We're over the wall and into the property, John and myself together, and as trained, moving slowly through the garden up towards the property. And when we just about got to the sort of area we'd want to be where we could observe the cars and perhaps the doors, we were surprised by the dogs.
Noye's 3 Rottweiler dogs were loose in the grounds. Afraid the dogs were going to blow their cover, Neil Murphy decided they should call a halt to their operation for that night.
I gave John a nod and I started to move away to leave the property. And when I got to the fence, which was about 20 yards away, I climbed up using a tree. I was able to climb up onto the fence, and I knew once I'd dropped down the other side, I was totally safe. I assumed John had done something very similar and was somewhere else on the property. We couldn't talk to each other on the radio because we didn't want to make any noise. And I paused for a few seconds while I was on the fence, looked back towards where I last saw John, and the torches were in that area, and the dogs were still barking. So I shouted, trying to get Noye and Reader to make a decision to leave. I shouted at them to shut the dogs up, pretending to be one of the neighbours of the properties where I was standing next to. And then the torch started to come my way a little bit, come towards me. So because of that, I made a decision to leave the property, and I jumped down into the garden and made my way back towards the front of the property.
Murphy had aborted the mission, but something was wrong. There was no sign of his colleague.
I got in a position where I could best see what was happening, and I could see 2 men standing over someone who was obviously on the ground. One of them shouted something about blowing your head off, and it was at that point that I realised this is a shotgun he's got. And I transmitted that to the guys listening, and the signal was given immediately then to enter the property.
With their surveillance operation blown, the flying squad burst onto Noye's grounds.
One of the officers from the flying squad and one of the officers who we'd taken over from, one of the surveillance officers, were looking after John, and one of the guys told me, it looks like he's been stabbed. And I remember saying to the ombudsman that, well, he's breathing, and I was actually feeling very positive. But the ombudsman said, no, he's not breathing, it's the oxygen we're giving him is pushing his chest out, doing the breathing for him. We were in like a waiting room in the casualty at the hospital. One of the senior officers came into the room and told us that John had died. That's how we found out.
John Fordham died of 11 stab wounds after a ferocious attack. Kenneth Noye was arrested at the scene. Brian Reeder was arrested fleeing from the property.
But from the police point of view, simply because of his professionalism, he was a huge loss, and there was a big empty hole. Can't talk about that. I mean, everyone was obviously devastated at the death of DC Fordham, and the whole inquiry, if you like, had been turned on its head as a result.
With Noye in police custody, his house and grounds were searched. 10 hours later, an officer found the evidence they needed to link Noye to the Brinks-Mat Bullion.
We did find 11 gold bars on the doorstep, pure gold that had been obviously melted and recast prior to them going to Bristol.
At the time, the 11 gold bars were worth around £100,000.
What was left was to now take action against all the people that we knew were involved in disposing of our gold. Within 24 hours, various premises in Bristol area, in London, were raided by hundreds of officers who came in to assist at that particular time. And we had to secure what evidence was left to us. But significantly, very significantly, the one pieces of evidence that we did find were A24 series £50 notes, which we knew had come from Scadlin.
With Noye's property raided and the gold and £50 notes found on his premises, D.I. Brightwell turned his attention to questioning Noye.
Immediately, Noye engaged me in a Masonic hand signal, and I recognised this, and I looked at him and thought immediately to myself that here is a man that's trying to ingratiate himself with me, thinks that I'll be able to help him, and is obviously looking to do business, as it were. In ordinary circumstances, if John Fordham had not been killed, I would have been delighted to talk to this guy, to do a deal, as it were, with him, because he knew where the gold was coming from. But I knew, because a copper had been killed, that there was no way that this could happen. And as soon as he learnt of my feelings on that, he really showed a different side of himself, but I could see the aggression building in him.
With no deal struck, the police found it almost impossible to get any more information on the gold trail. 10 months later, Noye stood trial at the Old Bailey for the murder of DC John Fordham.
I knew that Noye had probably one of the best criminal barristers that I've ever come up against in my time in the police. I understand that the jury were taken down to Hollywood Cottage at night to replicate these conditions, and basically put the question to them, how would you react if you'd have confronted someone, as John Fordham was, dressed in black, blacked out face, in the middle of the night? How would you have reacted? Would you have acted in self-defence? And the jury chose to go down that route, where they agreed it was self-defence and acquitted him of murder. John Fordham, when all said and done, was unarmed. As I've always said, the 11 stab wounds is not self-defence. That's a frenzied attack.
It was a confident Noye who strolled back into the Old Bailey 5 months after his acquittal for the murder of John Fordham. This time, he was facing charges for handling the Brinks-Mat Bullion and a second charge of conspiracy to evade VAT. Would he walk free a second time?
First and foremost, we have to convince the jury that this gold is from the Brinks-Mat robbery. And we do that by proving that it's fine gold, i.e. the 4 nines gold, 99.99% gold. Now, once you've done that, you're halfway there to proving circumstantially
that this gold, although the numbers had been obliterated from it and any identifying mark taken off it, must have come from the Bullion robbery. But the real clincher for me was the A24 series notes, because after his arrest, it gave us time to look at the accumulated wealth of people like Noye and other associates. They all linked together through these A24 series notes.
The jury found Kenneth Noye guilty, both of conspiracy to handle Brinksmat gold and VAT fraud. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison.
The only saving grace through the whole thing was the fact that he was convicted of handling the gold. I think if he'd walked free from court on that, having killed John, that would have been devastating. When I was told that he'd been convicted of handling the gold at least and got the maximum sentence of 14 years, I was delighted to hear that. In fact, I was shaking, just shaking with, trembling with excitement that at last he had his comeuppance and he was going away.
Scadlin boss Garth Chappell was sentenced to 10 years, whilst Brian Reeder was jailed for 9. Despite years of police work, the greatest unanswered question of the heist still remains. What happened to the rest of the gold?
We knew that the chances of us ever recovering any more gold were minimal, because our lines of inquiry regarding gold and how it was getting to Noye's house unfortunately had died with John Fordham, and there was no way that we could reconstitute that investigation. The route would now be dead and buried.
The gold may have gone, but for those involved, the scars still remain.
The only place I ever imagined that I would be involved in a robbery would be outside doing what we would call a bank move. I never once imagined a robbery would take place at the depot.
Well, I say that was my second. I had another 2 after that. And then in the end, I thought it was time to get out before I was carried out feet first.
You sit there and you look around people and you think, even after the robbery, I mean, the guys that were here then, you look around them and you think, can I trust you? Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, Tony Black is a scum of the earth for what he did to myself and to my colleagues, but also our families. And I hope he rots in hell.
The only thoughts I have are for John's family. I think about them quite a lot and how they've missed all the years that they haven't had with him.
As far as recovery of the gold was concerned, the 11 gold bars found at Kenneth Noye's house was the only gold ever recovered from the Bullion robbery. Now that's 11 gold bars out of 6,800 gold bars. 13 million of gold was disposed of. But that's only half. So it's pure conjecture what happened to the other half.
Some say large amounts of bullion were flown out of the UK. Others think the bulk of it is still hidden in Britain. It's also thought that anyone who bought gold jewellery in the UK after November 1983 could be wearing the Brinksmat stolen gold.